The little girl was kneeling in the mud when Caleb Rook Mercer saw the bruise shaped like adult fingers wrapped around her wrist. She didn't flinch when his shadow fell across the gravestone. She just kept whispering to his dead son like prayer was the only language left that worked. Rain had turned the cemetery into something cold and unforgiving, the kind of October afternoon that makes you remember every mistake you ever buried. Caleb had come here every Friday for 6 years carrying guilt and a single white rose. He never expected to find a child crying at Daniel's grave. He definitely never expected her to look up at him with those hollow, terrified eyes and whisper the 4 words that would crack his world open. "Your son saved me." Most people don't believe in second chances after you've already wasted the first one. But sometimes God or fate or plain dumb luck drops a desperate child in front of a broken man and says, "Fix this or die trying." If you want to know whether a scarred biker with a dead son and a garage full of regret can become the kind of protector his boy always believed he could be, stay with me until the end. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop your city in the comments so I know where this story is landing tonight. Because what happened next in Willow Creek changed everything. Caleb Rook Mercer had learned to measure time in oil changes and seasons. 6 years, 3 months, 11 days since Daniel died. Not that he counted out loud. Men like him didn't count grief where other people could see it. They swallowed it whole and let it rot somewhere between the ribs and the spine until it became part of the architecture holding them upright. At 58, Caleb looked like something carved from scar tissue and bad weather. Broad shoulders under a black leather jacket worn soft in all the places his body bent. Gray beard threaded with white. Knuckles that had been broken so many times the bones didn't quite sit right anymore. Boots heavy enough to crack tile if he wasn't careful. The kind of man people stepped aside for at truck stops without making eye contact. But every Friday at 5:30, he parked his black Harley outside Willow Creek Cemetery, killed the engine, and let the silence settle over him like snow over a battlefield. The rumble died. The wind took over. And Caleb became just another father carrying flowers to a son who would never grow older than 32. He always brought one white rose. Clean stem, tight bloom, nothing fancy. Daniel had hated fancy. Caleb also carried a small folded flag he replaced monthly beside the headstone. American flag, triangle creased, the kind they gave you at military funerals when your boy came home in a box. Except Daniel hadn't died in combat. He died in a car accident 3 miles from home on a wet Tuesday morning while Caleb was under the hood of a Chevy in his garage, too stubborn to answer the phone when his son had called to apologize for their last argument. The details of that argument didn't matter anymore, except they did. They always did. Caleb walked the gravel path through Section C, past headstones worn smooth by weather and time, past plastic flowers faded to the color of old bones. His boots crunched over wet stones. Overhead, the October sky had gone the color of gunmetal, heavy with rain that had stopped an hour ago but threatened to return. The maples were losing their leaves in slow motion, red and gold drifting down like torn paper. Row 14. Third stone from the oak tree. Daniel James Mercer. Beloved son, teacher, friend. 1992 to 2018. Caleb stopped 3 feet from the grave and stood there the way he always did, waiting for something that never came. Peace, maybe. Forgiveness. Permission to stop hating himself for being alive when Daniel wasn't. But the dead don't give permission. They just stay buried and let the living carry the weight. He was about to kneel and place the rose when he saw her. At first, Caleb thought she was a shadow, or a trick of the fading light. A small shape folded beside Daniel's headstone, hunched over like something wounded trying to make itself invisible. Brown hair falling forward, thin shoulders trembling under a pale blue hoodie, too light for the cold. She was kneeling in the wet grass with both hands pressed together, not praying exactly, but holding something fragile between her palms. A paper crane. White once, now soft and damp at the edges from the rain. Caleb's boots scraped gravel before he could stop them. The girl's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide, deer in headlights wide, and she scrambled backward so fast she nearly lost her balance. The paper crane crushed against her chest like she thought Caleb had come to take it from her. He lifted one hand slowly, palm open, the same way he would approach a dog that had been kicked too many times. "Easy," he said, though his own voice sounded strange to him, rough from disuse. "I'm not here to scare you." She didn't answer. just stared at him with eyes too old for whatever small face they belonged to. Her cheeks were wet, but not only from the rain. Mud streaked the hem of her jeans. Her sneakers were soaked through, laces frayed, and one had snapped and been tied back together with a piece of red thread, like she'd fixed it herself because no one else had noticed it was broken. Caleb looked from the girl to the headstone, where Daniel's name sat carved beneath words that had never felt true. Beloved son. Caleb had loved him, sure, but he'd spent more time being angry than showing it. Teacher. Daniel had taught elementary school for a few years before the accident, and Caleb had mocked him for it once, said teaching was for people too soft for the real world. Friend. Caleb didn't even know who Daniel's friends had been. The white rose in Caleb's hand trembled once before he forced it still. He took one careful step forward. The girl flinched. So Caleb stopped. Instead of moving closer, he lowered himself onto the edge of the gravel path a few feet away, ignoring the cold damp that seeped into his jeans. His knees complained, old injuries from too many years on a motorcycle and a few fights that had ended badly. But he stayed down, making himself smaller, less threatening. For a long moment, the only sound was water dripping from the maple branches overhead. Then Caleb placed the white rose beside Daniel's grave and said, "That was my boy." The little girl stared at him as if the world had just shifted beneath her feet. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She looked at his jacket, his beard, his scarred hands, then back at the headstone like she was trying to solve a math problem that didn't add up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Are you the dad he said could fix broken engines?" Caleb couldn't move. The question reached into a place he'd kept locked for 6 years and dragged something up into the light. Daniel had said that. His son, who had died after their last conversation ended in anger, had told this child something kind about him. Before Caleb could answer, the girl glanced toward the cemetery gate. Fear passed across her face so quickly, he almost doubted he'd seen it. Almost. She tucked the paper crane into her sleeve and whispered, "I have to go before he finds me." Caleb's instinct screamed at him to stand up, block the path, demand a name, ask who she was afraid of, and why a child had to measure daylight like it belonged to someone else. But somewhere beneath 6 years of grief, Caleb remembered something Daniel had said during one of their better afternoons, back when they still had those. Scared kids don't need louder adults. They need safer ones. So Caleb stayed seated on the damp gravel, his big hands open on his knees, his voice low enough that it blended with the dripping trees. "You don't have to run from me." The girl swallowed hard. Her eyes flicked toward the black iron gate at the bottom of the hill. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers." "That's a good rule," Caleb said. "A smart one." That seemed to surprise her. Most adults, he guessed, tried to talk children out of their own safety when it suited them. He nodded toward the stone without pointing at her. "But you knew my son. So maybe I'm not exactly a stranger. Not safe yet, maybe. But not nothing." The girl looked down at the wet grass. Her fingers tightened around the paper crane hidden in her sleeve. "Mr. Daniel said some people look scary because life made them wear armor." Caleb felt the words settle against his ribs like stones. Daniel had always talked like that. Gentle ideas wrapped in simple language so children could carry them. Caleb had mocked him for it once, said the world didn't need more poets. It needed people who could change oil and pay bills on time. Now he would have given everything to hear that voice again. "He was right about a lot of things," Caleb said quietly. "Not everything. He thought instant coffee was acceptable." A small sound escaped the girl before she could stop it. Not quite a laugh, but close enough to make Caleb's chest ache. "He drank hot chocolate at school," she whispered, "with the little marshmallows." "That sounds more like him." The wind shifted, lifting the edge of her hoodie. Caleb noticed how thin it was, how her hands had gone red from the cold. She was trying not to shiver, the way children do when they've learned that needing something can become a problem for other people. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "Maisie." A pause. "Maisie Whitaker." "I'm Caleb Mercer. Some people call me Rook." "Like the bird?" "Like the chess piece. I wasn't smart enough to be the king." This time the tiny smile almost reached her eyes, but it disappeared when a car passed slowly beyond the cemetery fence. Maisie turned her face away as if shrinking could make her invisible. Caleb saw it. He also saw the mud on the back of her jeans, the scuffed palms, the way one shoulder hung lower under the weight of a small backpack that looked too heavy for a child her size. He didn't ask the question burning in his throat. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief, folded square from habit. He placed it on the gravel between them and slid it only halfway toward her. "For your face, if you want it." Maisie stared at the cloth like it might cost her something. Then she picked it up with 2 fingers and wiped her cheeks. "Thank you." Caleb nodded toward the grave. "You came a long way." "Not that far." "How far is not that far?" She pressed her lips together. "Past the old feed store. Then across Miller Road." Caleb knew the distance. Nearly 3 miles if she'd walked the shoulder. More if she'd stayed off the main road to avoid being seen. His stomach tightened, but his face stayed calm. "That's a long walk in wet shoes." Maisie looked down quickly, embarrassed. "They dry sometimes." The sky darkened another shade, and the first evening lights blinked on near the cemetery office. Down by the gate, Martha Bell was closing the little flower stand she ran beside the stone wall, stacking unsold carnations into a white bucket. She was 60-something, gray-haired, the kind of woman who knew everyone's grief by name because she sold flowers to the living and the dead without judgment. Caleb lifted one hand, not waving wildly, just enough to catch her eye. Martha paused, saw the child, and her face changed in that silent way older women have when their hearts understand before their mouths do. Maisie noticed and backed up a step. "Please don't tell anyone." "I'm not going to make trouble for you," Caleb said, "but I'm not going to let you walk back cold and hungry in the dark either." Her eyes filled again, fast and quiet. "I'm not hungry." At that exact moment, her stomach gave a small hollow growl that seemed loud in the cemetery silence. Maisie folded her arms around herself, ashamed. Caleb looked away on purpose, giving her dignity. "I get hungry too," he said, "especially after talking to people who drink hot chocolate with marshmallows." Martha was already coming up the path with a paper cup in one hand and a careful smile on her face. Caleb stayed still, keeping his body between Maisie and the open gate without making it feel like a cage. "That's Mrs. Bell," he said. "She sells flowers here. She's known me long enough to know I'm grumpy, but mostly harmless." Maisie didn't smile this time. Her eyes had dropped to her wrist, where the sleeve of her hoodie had pulled back just enough for Caleb to see dark blue ink written on pale skin. 2 words. "Ask Daniel." The world went very quiet around him. Before he could say anything, Maisie yanked the sleeve down and whispered, "I wasn't supposed to let anyone see that." Martha Bell climbed the wet path slowly, one careful step at a time, holding the paper cup as if it were something sacred. Not gas station cocoa warmed in the little microwave behind her flower stand, but proof that kindness still existed in a world that made children walk 3 miles alone. She had the kind of face that seemed made from soft wrinkles and hard years. When she reached them, she didn't ask Maisie why she was alone or why her shoes were soaked. She simply lowered the cup onto the stone bench near the path and said, "This cemetery gets colder than people expect after sundown." Maisie looked at the cocoa, then at Caleb, then back toward the gate. Caleb saw the battle in her eyes. Want against fear. Hunger against warning. Trust trying to lift its head and being pushed back down by whatever waited for her beyond the cemetery wall. "You can drink it right there," Martha said gently. "No need to come closer to anyone." Maisie took the cup with both hands. Steam curled up around her small face, and for 1 second she looked less like a child carrying a secret and more like a child who had been handed something warm on a cold day. Caleb kept his eyes on the maple tree above Daniel's grave, giving her the mercy of not being watched while she drank. "I've seen you before, sweetheart," Martha said after a while, her voice as careful as footsteps on ice. "3 times this month, I think. You bought the yellow carnations last Tuesday." Maisie froze with the cup halfway to her mouth. They were old. They were still flowers, Martha smiled a little. "Daniel always liked yellow," said it made classrooms look less tired. Caleb turned his head slowly. "You knew my son liked yellow?" Martha looked at him with sadness that had been waiting years for the right door to open. "Your boy came by now and then when he was teaching at Wickham Elementary. Sometimes he bought dollar flowers for students who'd had a hard week. Never made a show of it. Just said some children needed proof that the world noticed them." Caleb felt the cemetery tilt under him. 6 years of visiting this grave, and he'd never known that Daniel had walked these same paths carrying flowers for children whose names Caleb had never asked to learn. Maisie stared into her cocoa. He gave my mom yellow flowers once, when she got the job interview at the laundry place. Her voice thinned. She put them in a jelly jar. Caleb let the words breathe before touching them. Where's your mom now, Maisie? The girl's shoulders rose as if the question itself was cold. Home, I guess. Does she know you're here? Maisie didn't answer. The sky dimmed and the cemetery lights hummed on one by one, pale circles opening along the path. Martha and Caleb exchanged a look. Not dramatic, not panicked, just the quiet alarm of adults who understood that silence can tell more truth than a child is allowed to speak. Caleb lowered his voice. Did somebody write those words on your wrist? Maisie pulled her sleeve tighter. I did. Ask Daniel, Caleb said softly. That's what it said. Her eyes filled again, but this time she looked angry at the tears, as if tears were another thing she might get in trouble for using. It was so I wouldn't forget. Forget what? What he told me. She swallowed. If things got bad again, ask Daniel, but he's not here anymore, so I came here. I thought maybe Graves could still hear you. Martha pressed a hand to her chest, but Caleb stayed still. If he moved too fast, grief would make him frightening. If he spoke too loud, anger would borrow his mouth. So he breathed once, slow and deep, tasting rain and cut grass and the faint exhaust from the road below. What got bad again? Maisie looked past him toward the gate. A pickup truck rolled by on the road outside, slow enough that its tires whispered against the wet pavement. It didn't stop, but Maisie shrank behind the cup as if the sound had reached into her bones. Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew fear that arrived before proof. He'd lived with it in combat zones, in clubhouses where men settled debts with fists and knives, in hospital waiting rooms where doctors wouldn't meet his eyes. Maisie, he said carefully, you're not in trouble with me. Everyone says that before they send you back. The words came out before she could catch them. Then she clamped her mouth shut, eyes wide, as if she'd just broken a rule she couldn't name. Martha glanced down the hill toward the small stone office beside the cemetery gate. There's a chapel near the office, she said gently. It has a heater and crackers in the pantry. We can all sit where the door stays open and the lights are on. Maisie shook her head. I have to go. Not alone, Caleb said, then softened immediately. Not because I'm bossing you, because it's getting dark and you walk nearly 3 miles in wet shoes. A safe grown-up doesn't let a child do that. She stared at him. How do I know you're safe? The question didn't offend him. It humbled him. Caleb looked at Daniel's headstone, then back at the girl his son had once protected with flowers and hot chocolate and words gentle enough to survive death. You don't have to know yet, he said. You only have to know I'm willing to be checked. Mrs. Bell knows me. We can call the sheriff's office if we need to. Safe people don't ask you to hide. Safe people bring other safe people into the room. Maisie held the cocoa close, trembling harder now that warmth had reminded her how cold she was. At last she gave one small nod. Caleb rose slowly, keeping plenty of space between them. Martha walked on Maisie's left. Caleb stayed a few steps behind, close enough to protect, far enough not to crowd. But halfway to the chapel, Maisie stopped and looked back at Daniel's grave. Can I leave him the crane first? She asked. Caleb couldn't speak, so he nodded. She placed the damp paper bird at the base of the stone, right beside Caleb's white rose. Then she whispered, I found your dad. Please let that mean something. The chapel at Willow Creek Cemetery was small enough that Caleb could see every corner from the doorway, which made it easier for Maisie to breathe. The lights were warm and low, not the harsh white kind that made frightened people feel examined. A space heater hummed near the front pew, sending a faint smell of dust and old wood into the air. Martha guided Maisie to a bench close to the open door, while Caleb stayed near the wall, arms loose at his sides, making himself as small as a man his size could manage. A moment later, a man in his 60s appeared from the back office with a sleeve of crackers, 2 napkins, and the serious kindness of someone who'd spent 30 years sitting with people on the worst days of their lives. I'm Samuel Price, he said. I keep the lights on here. You're welcome as long as you need them. He didn't ask Maisie for her whole story. He didn't tell her to calm down. He simply placed the crackers on the bench between her and Martha and stepped back. Maisie ate slowly at first, then with the careful restraint of a child trying not to look too hungry. Caleb turned his face toward the chapel window, giving her privacy, but every small sound seemed to land inside him. The crinkle of the cracker sleeve, the whisper of her wet shoes against the floor, the tiny breath she took before deciding whether a room was safe enough for the next word. "Mr. Daniel used to sit like that," she said suddenly. Caleb looked over. Like what? Like he was listening with his whole face. Her fingers worried the edge of the napkin. At school, when kids talked too fast or cried too much, he wouldn't interrupt. He said sometimes words have to come out crooked before they come out true. Samuel Price lowered himself into a chair near the aisle. Martha folded her hands in her lap. No one rushed her, and that seemed to puzzle Maisie more than if they had shouted. "He was only my teacher for 6 weeks," she continued. "Mrs. Hanley had surgery, so he came to our class. Everybody liked him because he could draw motorcycles on the board, but I liked him because he noticed things." Caleb felt his throat tighten. Daniel had noticed everything as a boy, too. A bird with a bent wing, a classmate eating alone, a stray dog limping beside the highway. Caleb had once called it softness because he hadn't understood it was courage. "What did he notice about you?" Caleb asked. Maisie looked down at her hands. "That I saved half my lunch every day for later." Martha made a small sound. "For your mom?" she asked gently. Maisie nodded. The room became very still. Not from shock, but from respect for the weight a child had been carrying in a lunchbox. "He never made me feel bad," Maisie said. "He just started bringing extra granola bars and pretending he bought too many. Then one day he asked if my mom liked yellow flowers. I said she used to, so he got her some from Mrs. Bell." Martha looked away, blinking hard. Caleb saw Daniel in pieces now. Not the son he'd argued with in a driveway 6 years ago, but the man moving quietly through classrooms and flower stands, building safety out of small things no one else counted. The memory came without mercy. Daniel at 26, standing in Caleb's garage with rain on his jacket and frustration in his eyes, saying he wanted to help kids whose families were falling through cracks. Caleb had been under the hood of a truck, pretending the carburetor mattered more than the conversation. "You can't save every broken kid," Caleb had said. He remembered the exact sound of the wrench dropping onto the concrete after Daniel went quiet. He remembered his son's answer, soft but firm. "Maybe not, but I can stop pretending I don't see them." That had been one of their last real talks before the accident, and Caleb had spent 6 years replaying it like a sentence passed by a judge he couldn't appeal to. In the chapel, Maisie reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded worksheet worn soft from being opened too many times. At the top, in Daniel's neat handwriting, were the words, "Things that make me feel safe." Underneath, Maisie had written in uneven pencil, "Warm soup, Mom's singing, locked windows, Mr. Daniel, yellow flowers, people who knock before opening doors." Caleb stared at the last line until the letters blurred. "He gave that to you?" Maisie nodded. "He said if I could name safe things, I could find them again." She touched the paper like it was a map. "After he died, I kept trying, but safe things kept disappearing." Caleb wanted to tell her he was sorry, but the words felt too small for a child who had walked 3 miles to ask a dead teacher for help. Then Maisie reached deeper into the backpack and pulled out a thin, wrinkled envelope sealed with old tape. Across the front, in Daniel's handwriting, was a name Caleb hadn't expected to see, Anna Whitaker. Maisie held it against her chest. "My mom said this letter was why Mr. Daniel mattered," she whispered, "and why, if things ever got bad enough, I should find the man who taught him how to fix what other people threw away." Caleb's hands went cold. Samuel Price glanced at him. Martha did too, but Maisie didn't hand over the letter yet. She looked toward the open chapel door, toward the darkening cemetery beyond it, and her voice dropped to almost nothing. "I think someone followed me here." Caleb's eyes moved to the chapel door, but the rest of him stayed calm. That was the hardest part. The old version of him, the one who had lived by noise and intimidation, would have stepped outside like a storm looking for something to break. But Maisie was watching him now, measuring every breath, every twitch of his hands, deciding whether Daniel's father was truly safe or only another big man with a louder voice. So Caleb did what his son would have wanted. He looked at Samuel Price and said, "Could you call Deputy Grace Malloy? Tell her we have a child here who may need a welfare check at home." Samuel nodded once and reached for the office phone without asking questions. That was the thing about men who'd spent decades burying strangers. They knew when to move fast and when to stay quiet. Martha shifted closer to Maisie, not touching her, just making the bench feel less empty. "You did the right thing telling us," Martha said. Maisie's eyes stayed on Caleb. "He says people make things worse when they talk." "Some people do," Caleb answered. "The right people make things safer." The words seemed to settle somewhere inside her, though not all the way. She held the envelope so tightly the paper bent under her fingers. "Mom said not to lose this." Caleb crouched near the end of the pew, keeping his boots planted and his hands visible. Every movement deliberate. Every inch of space respected. "You don't have to give it to me unless you want to." Maisie looked at the name written across the front. Anna Whitaker. Her mouth worked silently for a moment, then she spoke so quietly Caleb almost missed it. "My mom met Mr. Daniel after I cried in class because I forgot how to spell address." Her face twisted with embarrassment. "I knew how, I just didn't know which one to write." No one interrupted. Outside, a car passed on the road, its headlights sliding briefly across the chapel wall like pale fingers. Maisie waited until the light vanished before she continued. "We were staying with my mom's cousin then, Ronald. He said we should be grateful because not everybody lets family take up space." She said the words like she was repeating something she'd heard too many times. Mom worked at the laundry place when they had hours. Sometimes she cleaned offices at night. Mr. Daniel found out because I kept falling asleep during reading time. Caleb could see it too clearly. Daniel kneeling beside a child's desk, voice soft, noticing what adults with clipboards and busy lives might miss. "He called my mom," Maisie said, "not to get her in trouble. He said he had extra information about food programs and winter coat drives and numbers for people who helped with gas cards." Her voice broke slightly. Mom cried after that, but happy crying, like when something heavy gets set down for a minute. Martha covered her mouth with her hand. Samuel Price stood in the office doorway, phone receiver still against his ear, listening with the solemn attention of a man who understood testimony when he heard it. "For a while things got better," Maisie said. "Mr. Daniel helped Mom fill out forms. He gave her the number for a counselor. He said grown-ups need help too, and that didn't make them bad." She looked at Caleb then, her expression suddenly fierce in its smallness. He wasn't just nice. He was useful nice. Caleb almost smiled through the ache in his chest. Useful nice. That was Daniel turning kindness into bus passes, phone numbers, sandwiches, and flowers that said someone was still worth celebrating. "Then he died," Maisie whispered. The heater hummed. Rainwater tapped from the chapel roof in slow drops. Mom tried to keep going. She really did. But some days she stayed in bed and looked at the wall like she was waiting for somebody to call her back from far away. Ronald said she was embarrassing the family. He took her phone because he said she used it wrong. Then he started keeping the mail. He said forms and appointments were too much for her. He said I should stop talking about Mr. Daniel because dead people don't pay rent. Caleb's hands curled once, then opened again. He didn't let Maisie see the anger as a weapon. He turned it into stillness. "Did Ronald hurt you?" he asked carefully. Maisie shook her head fast. Too fast, like she'd been trained to answer before thinking. "He doesn't do things people can see." The sentence hung in the chapel, heavier than any shout could have been. Caleb nodded slowly. "That matters too." Her eyes searched his face, surprised. "It does?" "Yes," Caleb said. "Being scared in your own home matters. Being hungry matters. Having your mom kept away from help matters. You don't have to prove pain with bruises for adults to listen." Something in Maisie broke open then, not loudly, not dramatically. Her shoulders folded and the envelope slid into her lap. "I came because Mom wouldn't wake up for dinner. She was breathing, but she wouldn't answer. Ronald said to leave her alone and stop being dramatic. I remembered the letter. Mom said if things got bad enough, find Daniel's dad. But I only knew where Daniel was." Caleb felt the room narrow to the child, the envelope, and the name of his son carved into his memory. Samuel Price spoke gently from the doorway. "Deputy Malloy is on her way. I also asked for a medical welfare check at the Whitaker address." Maisie looked terrified. "Will Ronald be mad?" Caleb didn't promise what he couldn't control. He only said, "Maybe, but he won't be the only adult in the room anymore." At last, Maisie placed the wrinkled envelope into Caleb's open hand. The paper was soft from years of hiding and holding. Caleb looked at Daniel's handwriting on the front, then at the little girl who had trusted a dead teacher long enough to find a living father. He slid one finger under the tape and opened the letter just as headlights turned into the cemetery drive. The headlights washed across the chapel windows, bright for one breath, then dimmed as the vehicle rolled to a careful stop outside. Maisie stiffened so sharply the cracker in her hand broke in two. Caleb saw it and closed the letter without reading past the first line. Whatever Daniel had written could wait 5 more minutes. A living child could not. "Stay by Mrs. Bell," he said softly. Not as an order, but as an anchor. Samuel Price stepped into the aisle. "That should be Deputy Malloy." But before the deputy's cruiser door opened, another set of tires hissed over the wet gravel beyond it. A gray pickup turned through the cemetery gate and parked at an angle near the flower stand, its engine still running. Maisie's face went empty in a way that frightened Caleb more than tears. Fear had noise. This was practice. A man in a tan work jacket stepped out of the pickup. Average height, clean haircut, clean boots. The kind of man who could walk into a bank or a school office and be believed before he said a word. He looked toward the chapel with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Maisie," he called, voice loud enough for witnesses. "There you are. You scared everyone half to death." Deputy Grace Malloy stepped out of her cruiser at the same time, one hand resting near her radio, her expression alert but calm. She was in her 40s with rain beads on the brim of her hat and the steady posture of someone who'd learned not to mistake politeness for truth. "Sir, I need you to stay where you are for a moment," she said. The man lifted both hands in easy cooperation. "Of course, Deputy. I'm Ronald Whitaker. That's my niece. She wanders sometimes. Big imagination. We've been working on it as a family." Maisie sank smaller against the pew. Martha didn't touch her, but she angled her body between the child and the doorway. Caleb stayed by the wall. Every old instinct in him wanted to step outside and become the kind of man Ronald would remember. But Maisie had said he did things people couldn't see. So Caleb chose to make everything seen. "Deputy," he said evenly. "The child walked here alone in wet shoes from near Miller Road. She reports her mother may need medical help at home. Reverend Price called for a welfare check." Ronald's smile tightened. "I appreciate your concern, sir, but you don't know the situation. Anna has health issues. Maisie gets anxious. She tells stories when she wants attention." Caleb felt those words land like dust over a clean table, trying to cover the truth before anyone could inspect it. Deputy Malloy glanced at Maisie, but she didn't demand answers from across the room. Instead, she looked to Samuel Price. "Is the child warm, fed, and safe for the moment?" "Yes," he said. "The door has remained open. Mrs. Bell and I have been present the entire time." "Good." Ronald took one step closer to the chapel. "I can take her home now. This has gone far enough." Maisie made a sound so small it might have been missed by anyone who wasn't listening with their whole heart. Caleb heard it. Deputy Malloy heard it too. She turned back to Ronald. "Not yet." The two words changed the air. Ronald's expression didn't break, but something colder moved behind it. "Deputy, with respect, I'm her guardian tonight. Her mother is not well, and this man is a stranger wearing motorcycle colors in a cemetery after dark." There it was. The picture Ronald wanted everyone to see. A frightened girl, a rough biker, a misunderstanding that could be swept away if the right adult sounded reasonable enough. Caleb didn't defend his jacket. He didn't raise his voice. He held up the envelope instead. "Daniel Mercer was my son. Maisie came here because Daniel once helped her and her mother. She brought a letter addressed to Anna Whitaker in my son's handwriting. I haven't finished reading it." Deputy Malloy's eyes sharpened. "May I see the envelope?" Caleb passed it to her carefully. Ronald let out a small laugh. "A 6-year-old letter from a dead substitute teacher isn't a legal document." "No," Deputy Malloy said, looking at the front. "But it's context, and context matters when a child asks for help." Ronald's jaw shifted. For the first time, the polished surface cracked just enough for Caleb to see impatience underneath. "Maisie, come here." The words were quiet, but Maisie recoiled as if they'd pulled a rope around her ribs. Deputy Malloy stepped slightly to block the line between them. "Mr. Whitaker, do not direct the child right now." Caleb watched Maisie's hand creep into her backpack. She pulled out the folded worksheet Daniel had given her, the one titled Things That Make Me Feel Safe. Her fingers trembled as she held it toward the deputy. "He told me safe people bring other safe people into the room," she whispered. Deputy Malloy accepted the paper like it weighed more than evidence. Then her radio crackled. A voice reported that medical responders had reached the Whitaker house and requested the deputy's presence as soon as possible. Maisie squeezed her eyes shut. Ronald stopped smiling completely. Caleb looked at Daniel's letter in the deputy's hand, then at the child on the pew, and understood that the night was no longer about a grave. It was about whether the living would finally listen. Deputy Malloy read the radio message again, her face steady, but her eyes changed. Caleb had seen that look before in medics, mechanics, and men standing beside broken machines at midnight. It was the look of someone realizing the problem was worse than the first report, but still fixable if nobody wasted the next move. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "you're going to wait by your truck while I speak with Maisie." Ronald's voice stayed polite, but the softness had thinned out of it. "Deputy, this is unnecessary. Anna forgets appointments. She sleeps too much. The child gets dramatic when she doesn't get her way. You're rewarding bad behavior." Caleb watched Maisie's fingers tighten around the edge of Martha's sleeve. Deputy Malloy didn't look away from Ronald. "A child asking for help is not bad behavior." The sentence was quiet enough to fit inside the little chapel, but it landed with the force of a bell. Ronald stared at her for 1 second too long, then stepped back toward the chapel steps, jaw working as if he were chewing words he couldn't safely say. "Fine," he said. "Talk to her. But when this is over, I expect an apology." No one promised him one. Deputy Malloy waited until Ronald was outside with Samuel Price standing near the open doorway as a witness. Then she knelt in the aisle, not close enough to trap Maisie, but low enough that the child didn't have to look up at a uniform. "Maisie, I'm Grace. I'm going to ask a few questions. You don't have to make the story perfect. Just tell me the next true thing." Maisie looked at Caleb. He didn't nod like a coach. He didn't push. He only held Daniel's unopened letter against his chest and stayed still. "Mom was breathing," Maisie whispered, "but she wouldn't wake up for dinner. I shook her shoulder. Ronald said she was lazy and that I should stop bothering him. I tried calling Aunt Rebecca, but the phone in the kitchen doesn't work anymore, and Mom's cell phone is in Ronald's desk." Deputy Malloy wrote slowly. "Do you know your address?" Maisie recited it, then added, "The White House with the blue porch light. The porch light is always on because Mom said kids should know where home is." The words nearly undid Caleb. Home should not have been a porch light a child was afraid to return to. Deputy Malloy's radio sounded again. She listened, then said, "Copy. I'm at Willow Creek. Child is safe. I will remain with her until County Child Services arrives. Please notify hospital intake that the child's mother is Anna Whitaker." Ronald turned from outside. "Hospital?" Maisie flinched. Deputy Malloy rose and stepped between them again. "Medical responders are transporting Anna for evaluation. She is alive and she is receiving care." Maisie's breath broke once, but Martha whispered, "She's getting help, sweetheart. That's good news." Caleb closed his eyes for half a second. Good news could still hurt when it arrived through fear. Then Deputy Malloy turned to him. "Mr. Mercer, you may read the letter now, but I'd like to see it afterward." Caleb looked at the old tape, the softened paper, the familiar handwriting that had survived 6 years better than he had. He unfolded it carefully. The first lines were practical because Daniel had always put help before poetry. "Anna, if you're reading this, it means you need more support than one school can give you. Call the numbers on the back. Ask for food assistance, legal aid, and emergency counseling. Needing help doesn't make you a bad mother." Caleb's eyes burned, but he kept reading. Then his name appeared. "If you can't reach anyone else, find my father, Caleb Mercer. People know him as Rook. He looks like a storm cloud in a leather jacket. But don't let that fool you. He taught me how to fix engines, yes. But more than that, he taught me that broken doesn't mean worthless. He forgot that about himself somewhere along the road. Maybe helping someone else will remind him." Caleb's hand trembled. The chapel blurred around him. Martha, the deputy, the heater, the child, all turning soft at the edges. He had spent 6 years believing Daniel's last memory of him was disappointment. Yet here, in a letter meant for a struggling mother, his son had left him not as a warning, but as a refuge. Caleb pressed the paper carefully to his chest, as if it were something alive. Maisie watched him with solemn eyes. There's more, she said. Her small hand reached into the side pocket of her backpack and pulled out a photograph creased down the middle. It showed Daniel in front of a classroom bulletin board, crouched beside a much younger Maisie holding a yellow flower. On the back, in Daniel's handwriting, were the words, "Maisie is braver than she knows. Dad would like her." Caleb stared at the photograph until the years between him and his son cracked open. "He said you were his hero," Maisie whispered. "He said he just wished you knew." Outside, Ronald's voice rose, arguing into a phone. But inside the chapel, Caleb heard only Daniel. Not as a ghost, not as guilt, but as a son still reaching for his father through the hands of a child who had refused to let kindness be buried. County Child Services arrived 20 minutes later in a white sedan with government plates and a box of clean blankets in the back seat. The woman who stepped into the chapel introduced herself as Dr. Helen Ross, though she explained right away that she was there to help Maisie understand what would happen next, not to take over. That Maisie's voice still mattered. Caleb could see it in the way Maisie watched her, cautious but listening, still clutching Daniel's photograph like a small square of daylight. Deputy Malloy had Ronald remain outside near his truck while she took his statement, and for once, his neat words didn't seem to fill the whole world. There were too many other adults now, too many witnesses, too much light. Samuel Price made fresh coffee in the cemetery office. Martha brought another cup of cocoa and a dry pair of socks from the lost and found bin, pink with tiny white stars, the kind some child had left behind months ago and never claimed. Maisie hesitated until Dr. Ross said, "You can decide whether you want help changing into them, or you can do it yourself in the restroom with the door unlocked and Mrs. Bell right outside. Your choice." Such a small thing, Caleb thought, and such a mighty one when a child had been living without it. Maisie chose to do it herself. And when she came back, the oversized socks bunched around her ankles, making her look younger than 8 and stronger than anyone in that room had a right to ask her to be. Deputy Malloy returned from outside with her notebook closed. "Anna is at Mercy General," she said gently. "She's awake now. The doctors are checking her, and she asked about Maisie as soon as she could speak." Maisie pressed both hands to her mouth, and the sound that came out was not quite crying and not quite laughing. It was relief trying to find a shape. Dr. Ross moved no closer than necessary. "Your mom is safe tonight. You are safe tonight. We're going to contact your Aunt Rebecca, the one you mentioned, and confirm whether she can come in." Maisie looked at Caleb. "Will I have to go with Ronald?" "Not tonight," Deputy Malloy said before Caleb could answer. "There will be questions and paperwork, but not tonight." Caleb had never liked paperwork. In his old life, it had felt like a net made by people who didn't understand the road. But watching Maisie hear those words, he understood something Daniel had probably known all along. Sometimes paperwork wasn't a cage. Sometimes it was a bridge, a record, a way for the truth to stop being only a child's burden. Ronald left the cemetery after Deputy Malloy informed him he would need to speak with investigators the next day. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He drove away with the same polished silence he'd arrived with. But Maisie didn't watch the truck disappear. She watched Caleb instead. "Are you mad?" she asked. Caleb looked down at his hands, the hands that had fixed engines, clenched around grief, and failed too many times to reach for his son when reaching might have mattered. "Yes," he said honestly, "but not at you. And I'm going to use it the right way." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm going to answer questions. I'm going to give Deputy Malloy the letter and the photograph. I'm going to go to the hospital if your mom wants me there, and I'm not going to make this harder by pretending anger is the same thing as help." Dr. Ross nodded once, almost invisibly, as if Caleb had passed a test he hadn't known he was taking. Near 9 o'clock, Aunt Rebecca Whitaker arrived breathless from a town 40 miles away, wearing a work uniform under her coat and fear all over her face. Maisie stood still for one stunned second, then ran into her arms. Rebecca held her like someone receiving back a piece of her own heart. She thanked every person in the room, but when she reached Caleb, her voice broke. "Anna tried to call you once," she said. "Years ago. Daniel had written your number down, but the line was disconnected." Caleb remembered that disconnected phone. The months after Daniel died, when he'd ignored bills, meals, daylight, and anything that required him to remain among the living. Another door he hadn't known had closed. "I'm here now," he said, though it didn't feel like enough. An hour later, Caleb stood in the parking lot of Mercy General Hospital with rain starting to fall again. Cold drops that tasted like metal and exhaust. The Harley sat under a streetlight 20 feet away, chrome gleaming wet, engine ticking as it cooled. Deputy Malloy had taken Daniel's letter, and the photograph is part of the record. She'd also taken Caleb's statement, his phone number, and a long look at his face before she'd said, "Your son was right about you." Caleb hadn't known what to do with that, so he just nodded. Now he stood in the rain trying to decide whether to go inside. Anna Whitaker was awake. The doctors had stabilized her. Rebecca and Maisie were with her. And somewhere in a hospital room on the 3rd floor, a woman Caleb had never met was reading a 6-year-old letter from his dead son that said Caleb Mercer could be trusted. He wasn't sure that was true, but Maisie had trusted him enough to walk 3 miles in wet shoes. Daniel had trusted him enough to write his name down as a refuge. Caleb pulled his jacket tighter and walked toward the glass doors. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and cold air and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from waiting for answers no one wants to hear. Caleb took the elevator to the 3rd floor, found room 314, and stopped in the doorway. Anna Whitaker lay pale but awake beneath a clean white blanket, her fingers wrapped around Maisie's hand. Rebecca sat on the other side of the bed, one hand on Anna's shoulder. All 3 of them looked up when Caleb appeared. Maisie smiled, small and tired. "Mom, that's Mr. Caleb, Mr. Daniel's dad." Anna's eyes filled immediately. She was thin, dark circles under her eyes, the kind of tired that came from months of barely holding on. But when she looked at Caleb, she recognized something from Daniel's letter. "You're his father," she whispered. Caleb nodded. "I'm sorry I was late." Anna's breath hitched. "So was I," she said. "But she found you." Maisie looked between them, exhausted beyond words, then held out the damp paper crane she'd taken back from Daniel's grave before leaving the cemetery. Caleb accepted it with both hands. For the first time in 6 years, he didn't feel like he was standing at the end of his son's story. He felt like he'd been handed the next page. But the next page came with consequences. 3 days after Maisie found him at the cemetery, Caleb was in his garage with grease under his fingernails and a phone ringing on the workbench. He ignored it the first 2 times. By the 3rd, he wiped his hands on a rag and answered. "Mercer?" "Rook, it's Deputy Malloy. I need you to come down to the station. We have some questions about the Whitaker case." Caleb's stomach tightened. "Is Maisie okay?" "She's fine. She's with her aunt. But Ronald Whitaker has filed a complaint. He's claiming you coerced the child, that you manipulated her into making false accusations, and that you interfered with family matters outside your jurisdiction." Caleb closed his eyes. "When do you need me?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Bring a lawyer if you have one." He didn't have one. After he hung up, Caleb stood in the garage for a long time, listening to the rain hammer the metal roof. The Harley sat near the far wall, waiting. The tools hung in their places, everything exactly where it had been for 6 years, except now there was a paper crane on the workbench beside a photograph of Daniel kneeling next to a little girl with a yellow flower. Caleb picked up the photograph and looked at his son's face, 26 years old, smiling, alive. "You always said I needed to stop running," Caleb said to the empty garage. "Guess this is what that looks like." The next morning, Caleb walked into the sheriff's station wearing the same black jacket and boots he'd worn to the cemetery. Deputy Malloy met him in the lobby with a tired smile and led him to a small interview room with a table, 2 chairs, and a recorder sitting in the center like a third witness. "You didn't bring a lawyer," she said. "Don't have one." "You should get one." Caleb sat down. "I didn't do anything wrong." "I know," Deputy Malloy said. "But Ronald Whitaker is good at making people think he's the victim. He's already got 3 people willing to say Anna has a history of mental health issues, and that Maisie has been known to exaggerate. He's painting you as a grieving father who got emotionally involved and overstepped." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Is that what you think?" "No," she said. "But what I think doesn't matter if his story sounds better to a judge." She sat down across from him and pressed record on the machine. For the next hour, Caleb answered questions. How he'd found Maisie, what she'd said, why he'd called for a welfare check, what was in the letter, whether he'd ever met Anna Whitaker before that night. He answered everything honestly. When it was over, Deputy Malloy turned off the recorder and leaned back in her chair. "Rook, I'm going to be straight with you. Ronald has money. He has connections. He's already hired a lawyer who's very good at making social services look incompetent and making people like you look dangerous. If this goes to a hearing, they're going to pull up every speeding ticket, every bar fight, every time you've been on the wrong side of the law. Caleb had been on the wrong side of the law more times than he could count. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to be careful. Anna is still in the hospital. Maisie is with her aunt. But if Ronald pushes this, if he convinces a judge that you're a threat, they could use you as a reason to question the whole case. They could argue that the welfare check was invalid because it was based on the word of a traumatized child influenced by a stranger. Caleb felt the room close in. So I helped a kid and now I'm the problem. No, Deputy Malloy said. You helped a kid, and now you're the complication. There's a difference. She stood up and walked to the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, I think your son would be proud of you, but pride doesn't win court cases. Be smart, Rook. Get a lawyer, and stay away from the Whitakers until this is settled. Caleb walked out of the station into cold November air that tasted like exhaust and coming snow. The Harley waited in the parking lot, black and silent. He should have gone home. Instead, he went to the hospital. Anna Whitaker was sitting up in bed when Caleb knocked on the open door. She looked better than she had 3 nights ago. Color in her face. Eyes clear. Rebecca was gone, probably getting coffee, and Maisie was curled up in the chair by the window with a coloring book open on her lap. She looked up when she saw Caleb and smiled. Mr. Caleb. Anna's expression shifted. Not afraid, but careful. You're Daniel's father, she said. Yes, ma'am. Maisie told me everything. Anna's voice was soft but steady. She said you stayed with her when she was scared, that you called for help, that you read Daniel's letter. Caleb nodded. Anna looked down at her hands, then back up at him. I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand that I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm just telling you so you know. Caleb stepped into the room but stayed near the door. Okay, Ronald is my cousin. After Maisie's father left, Ronald offered us a place to stay. At first it was good. He helped with rent. He watched Maisie when I worked nights. But then things changed. He started controlling the money, the phone, the mail. He said it was because I was unreliable, that I couldn't handle stress. And maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't handling it. But he made it so I couldn't get better either. Anna's hands twisted in the blanket. When Daniel died, I lost the only person who'd ever helped me without making me feel like I owed them something. I tried to keep going, but I couldn't, and Ronald used that. He told me I was lucky he put up with me, that no one else would, and I started to believe him. Maisie had stopped coloring. She was watching her mother with an expression too old for her face. But then Maisie walked to the cemetery, Anna said, and she found you. And now Ronald is saying I'm unstable, that I put my daughter in danger by letting her wander, that you manipulated her into lying. Caleb's hands curled into fists. I didn't manipulate anyone. I know, Anna said, but Ronald is good at this. He's already talking to lawyers. He's already telling people that I'm mentally ill and that Maisie needs to be protected from me. And if they believe him, they'll take her away. The words hung in the air like smoke. Caleb looked at Maisie, who had gone very still, and then back at Anna. What do you need me to do? Anna's eyes filled. Nothing. I need you to do nothing. Deputy Malloy told me Ronald filed a complaint against you. If you keep getting involved, he'll use it to say I'm being influenced by dangerous people. He'll say, I can't make good decisions. And they'll take her. Caleb felt the floor drop out from under him. So I walk away. Yes, Anna whispered. I'm sorry. I know Daniel trusted you, but if you care about Maisie, you have to walk away. Maisie stood up so fast the coloring book fell to the floor. No. Maisie. No, Mom. He's safe. Mr. Daniel said so. Anna reached for her daughter's hand, but Maisie pulled back. Sweetheart, I know, but sometimes safe people still cause problems without meaning to. Tears streaked down Maisie's face. You said if things got bad enough I should find Mr. Daniel's dad. I did, and now you're sending him away. Anna's face crumpled. I'm not sending him away. I'm trying to keep you. Caleb looked at the two of them, mother and daughter, both crying, both scared, both trapped in a system that punished people for asking for help. And he understood. Daniel's letter had said Caleb could help, but it hadn't said how. And sometimes helping meant stepping back, letting other people fight battles you wanted to win for them. Caleb crouched down so he was eye level with Maisie. "Your mom's right." Maisie shook her head hard. "She's not." "She is," Caleb said gently. "Ronald is trying to make me the bad guy so he can keep control. If I stay, he wins. But if I step back, your mom and your aunt can fight him without me being used as a weapon." "But you're supposed to help." "I did help," Caleb said. "I got you somewhere safe. I called the right people. Your mom is getting care. That's what your Mr. Daniel wanted, and now I have to trust other people to finish it." Maisie's face twisted with the kind of betrayal only children feel when adults break promises they never actually made. "You're just like everyone else," she whispered. "You're leaving." The words hit Caleb harder than any punch ever had. He wanted to tell her he wasn't leaving, that he'd fight Ronald in a courtroom or a parking lot or anywhere else the man wanted to make a stand. But Anna was right. Fighting now would only make things worse. So Caleb did the hardest thing he'd ever done. He stood up, looked at Anna, and said, "You've got my number if you need it." Then he walked out of the hospital room without looking back. He made it to the parking lot before his hands started shaking. He made it to the Harley before the rage hit. And he made it halfway home before he pulled over on the side of the road, killed the engine, and sat there in the cold trying to figure out how helping a child had turned into abandoning her. The rain started again, hard and cold. Caleb let it soak through his jacket and run down his face like he was something that could be washed clean. His phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize. "This is Rebecca Whitaker, Anna's sister. I know what my sister just asked you to do. I also know it's killing you. But she's right. Ronald has money and lawyers and a clean record. You have a dead son and a motorcycle. If you fight him now, he'll bury you. And then he'll bury Anna. So please, walk away. For Maisie." Caleb stared at the message until the screen went dark. Then he started the engine and rode home through rain that turned to sleet somewhere near the county line. When he got back to his garage, the paper crane was still sitting on the workbench beside Daniel's photograph. Caleb picked it up and held it in his scarred hands. "You said broken doesn't mean worthless," he said to the photograph. "But what do you do when fixing something makes it worse?" The photograph didn't answer. But somewhere in the back of Caleb's mind, he heard Daniel's voice the way it had sounded 6 years ago in an argument neither of them had known would be their last. "You can't save every broken kid, Dad." "Maybe not. But I can stop pretending I don't see them." Caleb set the crane down gently. He'd seen Maisie. He'd helped her, and now he had to trust that the system he'd always hated would do what he couldn't. But 3 days later, the system proved him right to hate it. Rebecca called at midnight, her voice shaking. "They're giving Maisie back to Ronald." Caleb sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "What?" "The judge ruled that Anna is unfit. She's staying in psychiatric care for another 2 weeks. And since I work full-time and live 2 hours away, they're saying I can't provide adequate supervision. Ronald has a clean record, a stable home, and 3 character witnesses who say he's been caring for Anna and Maisie out of the goodness of his heart." Caleb was already pulling on his jeans. "When?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. They're doing a supervised handoff at the social services office." "Does Maisie know?" Rebecca's voice broke. "Yes, she knows. She asked me to call you." Caleb closed his eyes. "I can't do anything, Rebecca. If I show up, I make it worse." "I know," she whispered, "but she wanted you to know anyway. She said you promised you'd use your anger the right way, and she wanted to know if you'd figured out what that meant yet." Caleb stood there in the dark garage with the phone pressed against his ear and rage burning through his chest like gasoline looking for a match. And for the first time in 6 years, he knew exactly what Daniel had been trying to teach him. Anger wasn't the problem. Anger was the fuel. The question was what you built with it. Caleb hung up the phone, walked to the workbench, and picked up Daniel's letter. He read it again. Slowly this time. Every word. Then he read the list on the back. The phone numbers Daniel had written down for Anna. Food assistance, legal aid, emergency counseling, and one number at the bottom that Caleb had missed the first time. A name and a phone number written in Daniel's handwriting. Marcus Webb, Iron Sanctuary, MC. If Dad won't help, call him. He will. Caleb stared at the name, Iron Sanctuary. He knew that club. Knew Marcus Webb, too. They'd ridden together 20 years ago before Caleb had walked away from the Brotherhood and buried himself in grief and bad choices. Daniel had known about Marcus, had kept the connection alive even when Caleb hadn't, and now, 6 years after his death, Daniel was still trying to save people. Caleb pulled out his phone and dialed the number before he could talk himself out of it. It rang 3 times. Then a voice like gravel and cigarettes answered. Yeah? Marcus, it's Rook. A long pause. Rook Mercer. Yeah. Jesus, man, I thought you were dead. Close enough, Caleb said. I need help. And before you ask, no, it's not for me. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Your boy wrote to me a few months before he died. Said if anything ever happened to him, I should keep an eye on you. Said you were too stubborn to ask for help, but too dangerous to leave alone. His voice softened. What do you need, brother? Caleb told him. Everything. Maisie, Anna, Ronald, the letter, the complaint, the judge's ruling. When he finished, Marcus was quiet for so long, Caleb thought the line had gone dead. Then Marcus said, I'll make some calls. We'll figure this out. I can't ask you to. You didn't ask, Marcus said. Your son did, 6 years ago, and I don't break promises to dead men. The line went dead. Caleb stood in the garage with rain hammering the roof and his heart hammering his ribs. He'd walked away from the Brotherhood 20 years ago because he thought he didn't deserve it anymore. Thought he'd burned too many bridges, made too many mistakes. But Daniel had kept one bridge standing, and now Caleb was about to find out if it could still hold weight. At 8:30 the next morning, Caleb stood across the street from the County Social Services building, watching black ice form on the sidewalk. His breath came out in white clouds. His hands were shoved deep in his jacket pockets, fingers curled around nothing. He wasn't supposed to be here. Deputy Malloy had been clear. Anna had been clear. Rebecca had been clear. Stay away. But at 8:45, 3 motorcycles rolled into the parking lot and stopped in a line near the entrance. Marcus Webb got off the first bike. 2 other riders Caleb didn't recognize flanked him on either side. Marcus looked across the street and nodded once. Caleb nodded back. They weren't here to fight. They were here to be seen. Because sometimes the right kind of attention was the only thing that kept powerful men honest. At 9 o'clock, a county van pulled up. The door opened and Maisie stepped out, holding Rebecca's hand. Her face was pale, her eyes red. Ronald was already waiting inside the building. Caleb watched Rebecca kneel down and say something to Maisie, watched Maisie shake her head, watched Rebecca pull her into a hug that lasted too long because they both knew what happened when it ended. Then Maisie looked across the street, straight at Caleb. He shouldn't have been there. He knew that, but he couldn't make himself leave. Maisie's mouth moved. Caleb couldn't hear the words, but he saw them. You promised. And in that moment, Caleb understood that walking away wasn't the right move. It was the safe move, and safe wasn't what Maisie needed. She needed someone who would stand when everyone else sat down. Caleb stepped off the curb. Marcus saw him coming and moved to intercept. Rook, don't. I have to. You do this, you're done. They'll arrest you for violating the order. Ronald will bury you. Caleb looked at his old friend. Then he buries me. But she's not walking in there alone thinking no one cares enough to fight. Marcus stared at him for a long second. Then he stepped aside. Your son would have done the same damn thing. Caleb crossed the street just as Rebecca was leading Maisie toward the building entrance. A social worker in a gray suit stood by the door with a clipboard, checking her watch. Maisie, Caleb called. Everyone turned. The social worker's face went tight. Sir, you need to leave. This is a supervised transition. I know what it is, Caleb said. He kept walking until he was 10 feet from Maisie, close enough to be heard, far enough not to threaten. He looked at the little girl who'd walked 3 miles in wet shoes to find help at a dead man's grave. I can't stop this, he said. I wish I could, but I can't. The system is bigger than me, and right now it's doing what it thinks is right. Maisie's lip trembled. But I want you to know something, Caleb continued. Your Mr. Daniel was right. Safe people bring other safe people into the room. And I'm not leaving the room. I'll be outside that building every day making sure Ronald knows he's being watched. I'll be talking to lawyers, to advocates, to anyone who'll listen. And when this is over, when your mom is stronger and the truth finally gets heard, I'll still be here. The social worker stepped forward. Sir, I'm calling security. Do it, Caleb said without looking at her. His eyes stayed on Maisie. You're brave, kid. Braver than most adults I know. And that scares people like Ronald because brave kids grow up to be dangerous adults, the kind who don't stay quiet when things are wrong. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Caleb held up his hands. I'm leaving. But before he turned, he pulled the paper crane from his jacket pocket. The one Maisie had left at Daniel's grave. The one Caleb had carried with him every day since. He held it out. You left this for my son. I think you should keep it. Brave things deserve to be remembered. Rebecca took the crane and pressed it into Maisie's hand. The guards reached Caleb and escorted him back across the street. Marcus and the other riders fell in beside him, silent and solid. Caleb looked back once. Maisie was clutching the crane, tears streaming down her face. And then she disappeared into the building where Ronald Whitaker was waiting. Caleb stood on the sidewalk and watched the door close. Marcus put a hand on his shoulder. You just made everything harder for yourself, brother. I know. Was it worth it? Caleb thought about Daniel's letter, about the photograph of his son kneeling beside a little girl with a yellow flower, about 6 years of grief that had finally found a shape other than self-destruction. Yeah, he said. It was. His phone buzzed, a text from Deputy Malloy. What the hell did you just do? Caleb typed back. The right thing. Another buzz. Ronald just filed a restraining order. You're not allowed within 500 feet of Maisie or Anna. Violation means jail time. Do you understand? Caleb looked at the building where Maisie had just been handed back to a man who'd spent months teaching her that asking for help was dangerous. He typed one word. Yes. Then he pocketed the phone and looked at Marcus. I need a lawyer who doesn't mind losing. Marcus grinned. Brother, you just described every lawyer I know. They walked to the bikes through cold November air that tasted like snow and consequences. And for the first time in 6 years, Caleb Mercer felt like the man his son had always believed he could be. Not perfect, not safe, but willing to stand when it cost him everything. The lawyer Marcus found was named Catherine Voss, and she met Caleb in a diner outside town limits where the coffee tasted like burnt tar and the waitress didn't ask questions. Catherine was 50-something with silver hair pulled back tight and eyes that had seen every kind of lie a man could tell. She slid a folder across the table before Caleb even sat down. Restraining order filed this morning. You're not allowed within 500 feet of Maisie Whitaker, Anna Whitaker, or any property owned by Ronald Whitaker. Violation means immediate arrest and up to 6 months in county. Caleb didn't touch the folder. Can we fight it? We can try, Catherine said. But Ronald's lawyer is claiming you coerced a vulnerable child, interfered with family services, and showed up at a supervised transition despite being warned to stay away. The judge who signed this order doesn't like bikers, doesn't like vigilantes, and really doesn't like men with your jacket telling her system how to do its job. So I'm screwed. You're screwed, Catherine agreed, unless we can prove Ronald is the actual threat. And to do that, we need evidence. Real evidence. Not a letter from a dead teacher and a scared kid's word. Caleb's jaw tightened. Maisie doesn't lie. I believe you, Catherine said, but belief doesn't win in court. Facts do. And right now, all the facts say Ronald is a stable guardian and you're a loose cannon. She pulled out a second sheet of paper. There's something else. Anna Whitaker's psychiatric evaluation came back. She's been diagnosed with severe depression and anxiety. The report recommends extended inpatient treatment, which means even if we get her out of the hospital, she won't be deemed fit to care for Maisie for at least 6 months. Caleb felt the walls close in. So Maisie stays with Ronald, unless we find another option. Rebecca is fighting for emergency custody, but her work schedule is a problem. The court wants stability. Ronald provides that on paper. On paper, Caleb repeated. Catherine leaned forward. Listen to me, Rook. I know you want to ride over there and drag that girl out. I know every instinct in you is screaming to do something, but if you violate that order, you go to jail and Ronald wins. He gets to point at you and say, see, this is the kind of dangerous man influencing Anna Whitaker's decisions. And then Maisie loses the one person willing to fight for her. Caleb stared at his hands, scarred knuckles, grease under the nails, hands that had fixed engines and broken jaws and held his dying son's jacket at a funeral 6 years ago. What do I do? You stay quiet. You let me build a case. and you trust that the system will eventually do the right thing. The system just gave a child back to her abuser. Catherine didn't argue. She just closed the folder and stood up. I'll call you when I have something. She left Caleb sitting in the booth with cold coffee and the taste of failure in his mouth. Outside, Marcus was waiting by the bikes, smoking a cigarette in the freezing rain. 2 other riders stood nearby, quiet and watchful. Caleb recognized one of them now, a man named Priest, broad-shouldered and silent, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. The other was younger, maybe 30, with the kind of eyes that had seen combat and never quite come home. That's Landry, Marcus said, nodding toward the younger rider. He's good with computers. Used to do intelligence work before the war made him unemployable. Caleb looked at Landry. Can you find things people don't want found? Landry's expression didn't change. Depends on what you're looking for. Proof that Ronald Whitaker is dirty. Marcus exhaled smoke slowly. Rook, you're talking about digging into a man's life without a warrant. That's illegal. So is giving a kid back to someone who's been controlling her mother for months. Priest spoke for the first time, his voice like gravel scraping concrete. What are we looking for? Caleb thought about Maisie's face when Rebecca led her into that building. Thought about the paper crane crushed in her small hand. Thought about Daniel's letter sitting in an evidence locker somewhere, gathering dust while lawyers argued over words his son had written 6 years ago. Anything, Caleb said. Bank records, property records, complaints, anything that shows Ronald isn't who he says he is. Landry pulled out a phone. Give me 48 hours. They rode back to Caleb's garage through rain that had turned to sleet, the kind of cold that got into your bones and stayed there. Inside, the space heater kicked on with a rattle. Caleb made coffee that tasted like oil and exhaustion. The 3 riders sat on overturned crates near the workbench, and for a long time nobody spoke. Finally, Marcus said, Your boy would have hated this. Caleb looked up. What? Daniel. He would have hated seeing you like this, all tied up in legal bullshit when a kid needs help. He believed in the system. He believed in doing the right thing, Marcus corrected. Sometimes that's the system. Sometimes it's not. Priest leaned back against the wall. You know what we're risking here, Rook? We dig into Ronald, we cross lines. If we find something and use it wrong, we don't just lose. We make it worse for the kid. I know. Do you? Marcus asked. Because once we start this, there's no walking it back. We're not cops. We're not lawyers. We're just a bunch of broken men on motorcycles who think we can fix things we probably can't. Caleb looked at the photograph of Daniel still sitting on the workbench. His son's smile. Maisie's small hand holding a yellow flower. I don't care, Caleb said. I'm done watching people suffer because I'm too scared to break the rules. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but we do this smart. No cowboy shit. No showing up at Ronald's house in the middle of the night. We find proof, we give it to the lawyer, and we let her do her job. Agreed. Landry's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, then at Caleb. I found something. Everyone went still. What? Caleb asked. Ronald Whitaker owns 3 properties in the county. One is the house where Anna and Maisie were staying. One is a rental property near the industrial park, and one is a storage unit facility outside town. So the storage facility has been flagged twice in the last year for zoning violations. Both times, the complaints were dropped after Ronald made donations to the county commissioner's re-election campaign. Marcus leaned forward. What kind of zoning violations? Unauthorized commercial activity? Excessive truck traffic? Noise complaints from neighbors about machinery running at night? Priest's eyes narrowed. What the hell is he storing out there? Landry kept scrolling. I don't know. But 3 months ago, a social worker named Lisa Chen filed a report with Child Protective Services claiming she saw evidence of financial exploitation during a home visit to the Whitaker residence. The report was closed without investigation. Caleb's stomach turned. Why? Because Ronald's lawyer argued that Lisa Chen had a history of overreach and that the allegations were baseless. Chen was reprimanded and transferred to a different district. Marcus stubbed out his cigarette. That's not proof. That's just a pattern. It's a start, Caleb said. Landry looked up from his phone. There's one more thing. Ronald Whitaker's bank records show monthly deposits of $15,000 from an LLC called Clearview Holdings. But Clearview Holdings doesn't have a public business address. No employees listed, no tax filings. A shell company, Priest said. Yeah, and shell companies usually mean someone's hiding money. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. Can you find out where the money's coming from? Not legally, Landry said, but I can try. Marcus stood up. We need to see that storage facility. No, Caleb said. We need to stay away from it. If Ronald catches us snooping, he'll use it to bury me and everyone connected to me. Then we send someone he won't recognize, Marcus said, looking at Priest. Priest shook his head. I'm too big. I stand out. Landry grinned without humor. I look like I belong anywhere. Give me a clipboard and a high-vis vest, and I'm invisible. What's your plan? Caleb asked. I'll go out there tomorrow, pretend I'm doing a county inspection. Take photos. See what's inside those units. If Ronald's hiding something, I'll find it. Marcus didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. You get caught. We don't know you. Understood. They left an hour later, engines rumbling into the night like distant thunder. Caleb stood in the garage doorway watching their taillights disappear into the sleet, then turned back to the empty space. The paper crane sat on the workbench. He picked it up carefully, turning it over in his scarred hands. I don't know if I'm doing this right, Danny, he said to the photograph, but I'm trying. The photograph didn't answer, but somewhere in the back of Caleb's mind, he heard his son's voice again, softer this time. Trying is the part that counts, Dad. Caleb set the crane down and went to bed, though he didn't sleep. The next day crawled by like something wounded. Caleb worked on a transmission in his garage, but his hands kept slipping. His mind was at a storage facility outside town, where a man he'd never met was pretending to be someone he wasn't, so they could find evidence to save a child from a monster who looked like everyone's favorite cousin. His phone buzzed at 3 in the afternoon. A text from Landry. I'm in. Caleb stared at the screen. 5 minutes later, another text. You need to see this. Sending photos now. The first photo showed rows of storage units behind a chain-link fence. Standard prefab metal buildings. Nothing unusual. The second photo showed the inside of one unit. Caleb's blood went cold. Shelving units stacked with cardboard boxes. Labels on the boxes. Prescription medication names. Oxycodone. Hydrocodone. Fentanyl patches. Enough to stock a small pharmacy. The third photo showed a desk with ledgers open. Handwritten entries. Names. Dates. Dollar amounts. The fourth photo showed Ronald Whitaker's signature at the bottom of an invoice. Caleb called Landry immediately. Get out of there, now! I'm already gone, Landry said, breathless. But Rook, this is bigger than we thought. He's not just exploiting Anna. He's running pills. And from the looks of those ledgers, he's been doing it for years. Did anyone see you? No, I was in and out in 10 minutes. Send everything to Catherine Voss. Tell her we need to move fast. On it. The line went dead. Caleb stood in the garage with his heart hammering and his mind racing. This changed everything. Ronald wasn't just a controlling family member. He was a criminal, and if they could prove it, they could get Maisie out. But an hour later, Catherine called. We have a problem. Caleb's stomach dropped. What? The photos Landry took won't be admissible in court. He didn't have a warrant. He trespassed on private property. If we try to use them, Ronald's lawyer will get them thrown out and have Landry arrested. So we do nothing? No, Catherine said. We give the photos to the police and let them get a warrant. But that takes time, and it gives Ronald a chance to clean house. How much time? Days? Maybe a week? Maisie doesn't have a week. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then we need to make sure she's safe until the warrant comes through. Can you get a message to her without violating the restraining order? No. But I know someone who can. He called Rebecca. She answered on the first ring. Caleb? I need you to check on Maisie, today, right now. Don't tell Ronald I called. Just find a reason to visit. Rebecca's voice went tight. Why? What's wrong? Just trust me, and when you see her, tell her to stay close to adults she trusts. Teachers, neighbors, anyone. Don't be alone with Ronald if she can help it. Caleb, you're scaring me. Good. Be scared, but be smart. Can you do this? Yes? Call me after. 2 hours later, Rebecca called back. She was crying. She's gone. Caleb's world stopped. What? I went to the house. Ronald said Maisie wasn't feeling well and was sleeping. He wouldn't let me see her. I pushed. He got angry. He said I was overstepping and that if I didn't leave, he'd file a harassment complaint. So I left. But Caleb, I looked in the window before I drove away. Her room was empty. The bed was made. There was no one there. Caleb's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles went white. Did you call the police? They said Ronald has legal custody and that unless I have proof Maisie is in danger, they can't do anything. They said she's probably just at a friend's house or a doctor's appointment. She's 8 years old. She doesn't have friends Ronald would let her visit. Rebecca's voice broke completely. I know, but they won't listen to me. They think I'm being paranoid. Caleb closed his eyes and saw Maisie's face the last time he'd seen her, clutching a paper crane, walking into a building where a man who dealt pills and controlled women was waiting. I'm going to find her, Caleb said. Caleb, the restraining order. I don't care. He hung up and called Marcus. We need to move, now. 20 minutes later, 4 motorcycles pulled up outside Caleb's garage. Marcus, Priest, Landry, and a 4th rider Caleb hadn't seen before. A woman in her 40s with short, dark hair and the kind of scars that told stories she'd never speak out loud. That's Raylan, Marcus said. She's a tracker. Used to work search and rescue before she got tired of finding bodies. Caleb looked at her. Can you find a missing 8-year-old? Raylan's expression didn't change. If she's out there, I'll find her. They spread a map across the hood of Caleb's truck. Landry marked the locations of Ronald's 3 properties. The house, the rental, the storage facility. If he's hiding her, it's not at the house, Caleb said. Rebecca just checked. That leaves the rental and the storage facility. Or somewhere else entirely, Priest said. We split up, Marcus decided. Landry, you and Raylan take the rental. Priest and I will take the storage facility. Rook, you stay here in case anyone calls with new information. No, Caleb said. I'm going to the storage facility. Rook, if you get caught, then I get caught. But I'm not sitting here while that girl is missing. Marcus stared at him for a long second, then nodded. All right, but we do this quiet. No kicking in doors, no confrontations. We find her, we call the cops, and we let them handle the extraction. Agreed. They rode out into the November night with sleet turning to snow and the temperature dropping fast enough to make breathing hurt. The storage facility sat at the end of a gravel road surrounded by empty fields and darkness. No lights except for a single security lamp over the main gate. Marcus killed his engine 50 yards out. The others followed. They approached on foot, boots crunching over frozen gravel. The gate was locked, but Landry had bolt cutters in his pack. The chain snapped with a sound like a gunshot in the silent night. They slipped inside. Rows of units stretched into the darkness. Caleb pulled out his phone and used the flashlight app to check the numbers. Unit 47, the one from Landry's photos. The door was padlocked. Priest pulled a pry bar from his jacket and jammed it into the lock. Metal screamed. The lock broke. The door rolled up. Inside, the shelves were empty, every box gone, every ledger gone, the desk bare. He cleaned it out, Landry whispered. Caleb's heart sank. Then Raylan grabbed his arm. Listen. They all went still. From somewhere deeper in the facility, a sound, faint, almost buried under the wind, a child crying. Caleb's blood turned to ice. He ran. Unit 52. The crying was louder now, desperate. The door was locked, but Caleb didn't care. He grabbed the pry bar from Priest and rammed it into the lock with everything he had. Once, twice. The metal bent. The lock held. Marcus joined him. Together they pulled. The lock snapped. The door rolled up. And there, in the back corner of a freezing storage unit lit only by the glow of their phones, was Maisie Whitaker. She was curled on a concrete floor with a thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Her face was pale. Her lips were blue. But she was alive. Caleb dropped to his knees beside her. Maisie. Maisie, it's me. It's Caleb. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused. Mr. Caleb? Yeah, kid, I'm here. She started crying again, harder this time, and Caleb pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her. She was so cold she felt like ice.
"How long have you been here?" he asked.
"I don't know," she whispered. "Ronald said I was being bad, that I needed to learn what happens to children who tell lies. He said he'd come back when I was ready to apologize." Rage burned through Caleb so hot it felt like vomit in his throat, but he forced it down and focused on the child in front of him. "You're safe now, I promise." Marcus was already on the phone with 911, but before the call connected, headlights swept across the facility entrance. A gray pickup truck. Ronald Whitaker stepped out with a phone in one hand and something else in the other. A gun. And in that moment, Caleb understood that everything was about to get worse before it got better. Ronald Whitaker stood in the headlights of his pickup with the gun held low against his thigh, not pointing it yet, just letting everyone see it was there. His face was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that came from men who'd done terrible things before and slept fine afterward. "You're trespassing," Ronald said. His voice carried across the frozen gravel like he was discussing the weather. "That's breaking and entering. I have every right to defend my property." Marcus stepped forward, hands visible, empty. "Put the gun down, Ronald. The cops are on their way. This is over." Ronald smiled. "No, it's not. See, you broke into my facility. You destroyed my property. And when the police arrive, they're going to find an 8-year-old girl who ran away from home because she's been listening to a convicted felon in a motorcycle jacket tell her lies about her family." Caleb felt Maisie's small hand clutch his arm tighter. "I didn't run away," she whispered, but her voice was too small to reach Ronald across the distance. Caleb stood slowly, keeping himself between Maisie and the gun. His jacket was still wrapped around her shoulders. The cold bit into his skin through his shirt, but he didn't feel it. He felt only rage, controlled and precise, burning like diesel waiting for a spark. "She didn't run," Caleb said. "You locked her in a freezing storage unit because she told people the truth about you." Ronald's smile didn't waver. "Prove it." "The photos," Landry said from somewhere behind Caleb. "The ledgers, the pills. We have everything. You have illegally obtained evidence that will be thrown out of court before the judge finishes her coffee." Ronald tilted his head. "And you have a kidnapping charge waiting for whoever touched that child without my permission." Priest moved to Caleb's left, silent as a predator circling prey. Raylan shifted right. Marcus stayed center, blocking Ronald's line of sight to Maisie. Ronald noticed. "You really want to do this?" he asked. "4 bikers against 1 man defending his property? You think that plays well in court?" "I think you're a coward who locks children in freezing boxes," Caleb said. His voice was low, steady, the kind of quiet that made smart men nervous. "And I think you're about 3 seconds from finding out what happens when you threaten someone I care about." Ronald raised the gun. Not all the way. Just enough that the barrel pointed somewhere between the ground and Caleb's chest. "You care about her?" Ronald's laugh was sharp. "You didn't even know she existed until a week ago. But sure, play the hero, just like your son did. And look where that got him." The words landed like a punch to the throat. Caleb went very still. "What did you say?" Ronald's smile widened. "Daniel Mercer, that was his name, right? The substitute teacher who couldn't mind his own business, always sticking his nose where it didn't belong, asking questions, filing reports, making phone calls." Caleb's heart slammed against his ribs. "You knew Daniel." "I knew he was a problem," Ronald said. "Anna was supposed to stay quiet, stay dependent, but then your son gave her numbers to call, resources, hope, and hope makes people dangerous." Marcus's hand moved toward his belt, but Caleb caught his eye and shook his head once. "Not yet." "So you killed him," Caleb said. Ronald laughed again. "I didn't kill anyone. Your son died in a car accident, rainy Tuesday morning, lost control on a wet curve. Very tragic." "Miller Road," Caleb whispered. The same road Maisie had walked to reach the cemetery. The same road where Daniel had died 6 years ago in a single vehicle accident that the police had ruled driver error. Ronald's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Confirmation. Caleb's vision narrowed to a pinpoint. Everything else fell away. The cold. The other riders. Maisie trembling behind him. All of it disappeared except Ronald Whitaker standing in the headlights holding a gun and the memory of a phone call Caleb had ignored 6 years ago because he'd been too angry to answer. "You ran him off the road," Caleb said.
I didn't do anything, Ronald said smoothly.
But hypothetically, if someone wanted to make sure a nosy teacher stopped interfering with family business, a wet road and a blind curve would be very convenient. Maisie made a sound behind Caleb, small and broken. "Mr. Daniel," she whispered. Caleb felt something crack open inside him. Not grief this time, not guilt. Something colder, something that had been waiting 6 years to be used. Marcus saw it in his face. "Rook, don't." But Caleb was already moving. He crossed the distance between himself and Ronald in 4 strides, boots hammering frozen gravel. Ronald raised the gun, but Caleb was faster. His left hand knocked the barrel aside. His right hand closed around Ronald's throat. They went down hard. The gun skittered across the gravel. Caleb's fist connected with Ronald's face once, twice, the sound like meat hitting concrete. Blood sprayed. Ronald's head snapped back, but he wasn't finished. He twisted, drove a knee into Caleb's ribs, and threw him off. Caleb hit the ground and rolled. Pain exploded through his chest, where old injuries had never quite healed. He tasted copper and exhaust, and 6 years of rage finally finding a target. Ronald scrambled for the gun. Priest got there first. He kicked it into the darkness beyond the headlights, then grabbed Ronald by the collar and hauled him upright like he weighed nothing. "You don't get to touch that again," Priest said. Ronald spat blood. "You're all going to jail." "Maybe," Marcus said, stepping into the light. "But you're going first." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Raylan was already with Maisie, wrapping her in a second blanket, checking her pulse, whispering things Caleb couldn't hear but knew were meant to calm a terrified child who'd just learned the man who'd killed her teacher was the same man who'd locked her in a freezing box. Caleb pushed himself upright, ribs screaming. His knuckles were split. His face was wet with sleet and sweat and maybe blood. He didn't care. He walked toward Ronald, who was still being held by Priest. "You killed my son," Caleb said. Ronald's face was a mess of blood and rage. "You can't prove anything." "I don't need to prove it," Caleb said. "I know it, and now everyone else will too." The sirens were close now, red and blue lights strobing through the trees beyond the facility entrance. Marcus grabbed Caleb's shoulder. "Rook, we need to leave, now, before the cops get here and see what we did." "No," Caleb said. "We stay. We tell them everything. They'll arrest you for assault, for violating the restraining order, for—" "I don't care," Caleb said. He looked at Maisie, still wrapped in his jacket, still shaking. "She needs to see that sometimes the right thing is standing your ground even when it costs you everything." Marcus stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, brother, we stay." 3 sheriff's cruisers roared through the gate, tires spraying gravel. Deputy Malloy stepped out of the first one with her weapon drawn, eyes sweeping the scene. "Everyone on the ground, now!" Caleb raised his hands and knelt slowly. Marcus, Priest, Landry, and Raylan did the same. Ronald tried to stand, but Priest shoved him back down. "He locked a child in a storage unit," Priest said, "and he pulled a gun on us when we found her." Malloy's eyes found Maisie. The girl was barely visible under the blankets, her face pale, her lips still blue from the cold. Malloy's expression went from alert to furious in half a second. "Get paramedics here now," she shouted into her radio. Then she looked at Ronald. "Don't move." 2 other deputies moved in, one checking Ronald for weapons, the other securing the scene. A third went to Maisie with a first aid kit and a thermal blanket. Malloy walked to Caleb, still kneeling with his hands raised. "You violated the restraining order," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You assaulted Ronald Whitaker." "Yes, ma'am." "And you broke into private property." "Yes, ma'am." Malloy crouched down so she was eye level with him. "Why?" Caleb looked past her to where a paramedic was checking Maisie's vitals, wrapping her in heat packs, speaking to her in the gentle voice people use with trauma survivors. "Because she asked me to," Caleb said, "and because my son would have done the same thing." Malloy studied his face for a long time. Then she stood and called to one of the other deputies. "Cuff Whitaker. Charge him with child endangerment and unlawful imprisonment." Ronald's voice rose, sharp and desperate. "This is a setup. They're lying. I'm the victim here." Malloy ignored him. She turned to Caleb. "You're under arrest for violating a protective order and assault. You have the right to remain silent. I know my rights, Caleb said quietly. She cuffed him anyway. Marcus too. Priest, Landry, and Raylan. But before they loaded Caleb into the cruiser, Maisie broke away from the paramedic and ran to him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, the blankets trailing behind her like wings. You came, she whispered. You promised you wouldn't leave, and you came. Caleb couldn't hug her back with his hands cuffed, so he just bent down and pressed his forehead against the top of her head.
I'll always come, he said.
No matter what it costs. A deputy gently pulled Maisie away, and then Caleb was in the back of a cruiser watching the storage facility disappear through the rear window. Red and blue lights. Paramedics loading Maisie into an ambulance. Ronald Whitaker screaming about lawyers and rights and conspiracies while deputies shoved him into a different cruiser. Marcus was in the seat beside Caleb, hands cuffed behind his back, face calm. That went about as well as expected, Marcus said. Caleb almost smiled. Could have been worse. Could have been better. We found her. Yeah, Marcus said. We did. At the county jail, they were processed in silence. Fingerprints, mugshots, property seized, Caleb's jacket, his wallet, his keys, his phone. Everything that made him a person in the world outside disappeared into plastic bags labeled with his name and booking number. They put him in a holding cell with Marcus. Priest and Landry were in another cell down the hall. Raylan had been released on her own recognizance because she hadn't touched Ronald and hadn't violated any court orders. Caleb sat on the concrete bench and stared at the wall. You think she'll be okay? He asked. Marcus leaned back, eyes closed. The kid? Yeah. She's tougher than half the men I've ridden with. She shouldn't have to be.
No, Marcus agreed.
But the world doesn't care what kids should or shouldn't have to be. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Marcus said, Your son really wrote me that letter, 6 years ago. Said if anything happened to him, I should make sure you didn't disappear into that garage and die alone. Caleb looked at him. Why didn't you ever reach out? I tried, Marcus said. Couple times. You never answered. I wasn't ready. I know. Marcus opened his eyes and looked at Caleb. You ready now? Caleb thought about Maisie's face when she'd seen him in the storage unit. Thought about Daniel's letter saying broken doesn't mean worthless. Thought about 6 years of grief that had finally turned into something other than self-destruction. Yeah, he said. I think I am. A deputy appeared at the cell door. Mercer, you've got a visitor. Caleb stood. They led him to a small room with a table and 2 chairs. Catherine Voss was waiting, her silver hair still pulled back tight, her expression unreadable. Sit, she said. Caleb sat. Catherine slid a folder across the table. Ronald Whitaker has been charged with child endangerment, unlawful imprisonment, and possession of controlled substances with intent to distribute. The DEA raided his storage facility an hour ago and found enough pills to put him away for 20 years. Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. And Maisie? Safe. She's at the hospital with her mother and her aunt. Anna has been cleared for discharge pending outpatient treatment. Rebecca has been granted emergency custody. That's good, Caleb said. That's really good. Catherine's expression didn't change. You're still facing charges. Assault, violating a protective order, trespassing. The judge could give you 6 months. I know.
Or, Catherine said slowly, I can argue that you were acting to prevent imminent harm to a child, that you had credible reason to believe she was in danger, and that law enforcement response time would have been too slow. It's not a guarantee, but it might get the charges reduced or dropped. Caleb looked at her. Why would you do that? Catherine leaned back in her chair.
Because I've been a defense attorney for 30 years, and in all that time I've never seen anyone willing to throw themselves in front of a freight train for a kid they barely knew. Most people talk about doing the right thing. You actually did it. She stood. The preliminary hearing is in 3 days. Until then, you're stuck here. Use the time to figure out what you're going to say when the judge asks you why she shouldn't throw the book at you. Catherine left. Caleb sat alone in the room for a long time, staring at the folder she'd left behind. Inside was a copy of Daniel's letter, and beneath it, a new document, a petition for guardianship. Anna Whitaker and Rebecca Whitaker were requesting that Caleb Rook Mercer be named as a secondary guardian for Maisie Whitaker in the event that both primary guardians were unable to care for her. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting, Anna had written, "Daniel trusted you with this. So do I." Caleb read the words 3 times. Then he pressed the paper against his chest and let himself cry for the first time in 6 years. Not for what he'd lost, but for what he'd finally found. 3 days later, Caleb stood in front of a judge with his hands cuffed and Catherine Voss beside him. The courtroom was small, fluorescent lights humming overhead, wooden benches worn smooth by decades of people waiting for justice that came slow or not at all. Anna and Rebecca sat in the front row. Maisie was with a social worker in the hallway, deemed too young to witness the proceedings. The judge was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and the kind of face that had heard every excuse men like Caleb could invent. She read the charges. Then she looked at him. "Mr. Mercer, do you understand what you're accused of?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And how do you plead?" Caleb looked at Catherine. She nodded once. "Guilty, Your Honor." The courtroom went silent. The judge leaned forward. "You're pleading guilty to assaulting Ronald Whitaker and violating a protective order?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" Caleb took a breath. "Because I did those things. And because that little girl deserved someone willing to break the rules when the rules were protecting the wrong person." The judge stared at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the prosecutor. "Does the state have anything to add?" The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, in light of new evidence regarding Mr. Whitaker's criminal activities and the circumstances surrounding the child's endangerment, the state is willing to recommend a suspended sentence with community service and probation." The judge's eyebrows rose. "That's generous." "Mr. Whitaker is facing federal charges. The child is safe. And frankly, Your Honor, this court has bigger problems than a man who saved a kid." The judge looked back at Caleb. "Mr. Mercer, I'm sentencing you to 6 months probation and 200 hours of community service. You violate probation, you go to jail. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Good. And Mr. Mercer?" "Yes, ma'am." "Don't make me regret this." "I won't." The gavel came down. Caleb walked out of the courtroom a free man. Anna and Rebecca were waiting in the hallway. Maisie stood between them, holding the paper crane. When she saw Caleb, she ran. He caught her and lifted her off the ground, and she wrapped her arms around his neck so tight he couldn't breathe. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered. "Always," Caleb said. And for the first time in 6 years, Caleb Mercer believed he might actually deserve the second chance his son had left him. But as they walked out of the courthouse into cold December sunlight, Caleb's phone buzzed with a text from Landry. "We need to talk. Found something else in Ronald's records. Something worse." Caleb looked down at Maisie, still holding his hand. Then at the message. "And understood that some battles didn't end just because you won the first round." Caleb stood outside the courthouse with Maisie's hand in his and Landry's text burning a hole in his pocket. Cold December sunlight slanted across the concrete steps, turning everyone's breath to white clouds that hung in the air like unspoken questions. Anna and Rebecca were talking to Catherine Voss near the street, going over paperwork that would reshape Maisie's life into something safer. Maisie was watching a pigeon pick at crumbs near a trash can, still holding the paper crane in her free hand. Caleb pulled out his phone and texted back. "Where?" Landry's response came immediately. "Your garage, 1 hour. Bring Marcus." Caleb looked down at Maisie. "I need to take care of something," he said gently. "But your mom and your aunt are right there. You're safe now." Maisie looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much and survived anyway. "Is it about Ronald?" Caleb hesitated. He'd spent 6 years lying to himself about Daniel's death, telling himself it was an accident, that grief was just something you carried until it got lighter. He wasn't going to lie to this child. "Yeah," he said. "It might be. Are you going to be safe?" The question landed harder than it should have. Adults weren't supposed to need children to worry about them. But Maisie had learned the world backward, where grown-ups disappeared and promises broke, and the only way to survive was to ask the questions no one wanted to answer. "I'm going to try," Caleb said. Maisie squeezed his hand once, then let go. "Mr. Daniels said trying is the part that counts." Caleb felt his throat tighten. He was right. He walked Maisie back to Anna and Rebecca, told them he'd check in later, and headed for the Harley parked at the far end of the lot. Marcus was already waiting there, leaning against his bike with a cigarette burning down to nothing between his fingers. "Landry?" Marcus asked. "Yeah." "This about Ronald?" "Don't know yet." Marcus flicked the cigarette into the gutter and swung his leg over the bike. "Then let's find out." They rode through streets turned gray with winter, past strip malls and fast food joints, and houses decorated with Christmas lights that blinked on and off like mechanical heartbeats. The air tasted like snow that hadn't fallen yet, and exhaust from 1,000 cars going nowhere important. Caleb's garage sat at the end of a gravel drive surrounded by empty fields and skeletal trees. Landry's truck was already parked outside. So was Priest's bike. And Raylan's. Inside, the space heater rattled against the cold. The three of them stood near the workbench with a laptop open and faces that told Caleb everything he needed to know. This was going to hurt. "What did you find?" Caleb asked. Landry turned the laptop so Caleb could see the screen. Bank records, dates, transactions, names. "After we pulled Ronald's financial records, I kept digging," Landry said. "Clearview Holdings, the shell company funneling money to Ronald, has 3 other clients, all of them in the county, all of them connected to social services cases involving vulnerable families." Caleb felt his stomach turn. He wasn't working alone. "No," Landry said. He was part of a network. People identify struggling families through the system, offer help, get them dependent, then exploit them. Pills mostly. Using people's desperation to move product without getting their own hands dirty. Marcus's jaw tightened. "How many families?" "At least 12 in the last 3 years," Landry said. "Maybe more. The records only go back that far." Priest spoke from the corner, his voice like gravel scraping bone. "Where's Ronald now?" "County jail," Caleb said. "Federal charges?" "He's not getting out." "But the others are still operating," Raylan said. She was sitting on an overturned crate, arms crossed, eyes hard. "And they know we found Ronald, which means they're either going to ground or coming after anyone who can connect them to him." Caleb looked at the laptop screen again. Names he didn't recognize, addresses scattered across the county, a map of misery built on people too broken to fight back. "We give this to the police," Caleb said. "Already did," Landry replied. "Sent everything to Deputy Malloy 2 hours ago, but investigations take time, warrants, lawyers, months, maybe years before anyone sees a courtroom. So we wait," Caleb said. "Or we don't," Marcus said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. Marcus walked to the workbench and tapped one of the names on the screen. "Vincent Cray. He's listed as a property manager for Clearview Holdings. But I know him. Used to run with the Iron Kings before they got shut down for trafficking. He's not management, he's muscle." "So?" Caleb asked. "So muscle protects something worth protecting," Marcus said. "And if Vincent is involved, there's probably a central location where they're coordinating everything, somewhere off the books." Landry pulled up another file. "There's a warehouse listed under Clearview Holdings, industrial park on the south edge of town. Registered as storage, but the utility bills are 10 times higher than they should be for an empty building." Priest stood up. "You're talking about hitting a criminal operation without police backup." "I'm talking about making sure this doesn't disappear while lawyers argue over jurisdictions," Marcus said. Caleb looked at the names on the screen. Thought about Maisie locked in a freezing storage unit. Thought about Anna barely functional because Ronald had spent months convincing her she was worthless. Thought about Daniel driving down a wet road 6 years ago while someone ran him off the pavement because he'd asked too many questions. "What are we hitting it for?" Caleb asked. "Evidence," Landry said. "If that warehouse is their hub, there'll be records. More names, more families, enough to bury everyone involved before they have time to cover their tracks." "And if it's not just a warehouse?" Raylan asked. "If Vincent and his friends are there waiting?" "Then it gets messy," Marcus said. Caleb closed his eyes. Daniel wouldn't have wanted this. His son had believed in systems, in teachers and social workers, and people who followed rules because rules were supposed to protect the vulnerable. But Daniel was dead because someone had decided rules didn't apply to them. And Maisie was alive because Caleb had broken every rule that mattered. "We go tonight," Caleb said. "We get the evidence. We get out. No confrontations unless they start it." Marcus nodded. Priest cracked his knuckles. Raylan just smiled, cold and sharp. About time. They spent the afternoon preparing. Landry pulled up blueprints of the warehouse from county records. Priest checked weapons, not guns, but tire irons, chains, tools that could double as something else if the night went wrong. Raylan mapped escape routes. Marcus made calls to 3 other riders who owed him favors and didn't ask questions. By the time the sun set, there were 7 motorcycles lined up outside Caleb's garage. 7 riders dressed in black leather and bad intentions. Caleb stood in the doorway looking at them, these men and women who'd answered a call that wasn't theirs to answer, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Brotherhood. Not the kind built on patches and hierarchy and who'd been riding longest. The kind built on standing beside people when the world told you to walk away. Marcus walked over, zipping his jacket against the cold. "You don't have to do this, Rook. You've got probation. You get caught, you go to jail for real this time." "I know. Your son would understand if you sat this one out." Caleb looked at the photograph still sitting on his workbench. Daniel smiling. Maisie holding a yellow flower. "No," Caleb said. He wouldn't. They rode out into the December night with engines rumbling like distant thunder and headlights cutting through darkness that seemed to go on forever. The warehouse sat at the edge of the industrial park, surrounded by chain-link fence and shadows. One security light flickered over a loading dock. No cars in the lot. No visible movement. Too quiet. Marcus killed his engine 2 blocks out. The others followed. They approached on foot, boots crunching over frozen asphalt, breath steaming in the cold. Landry had bolt cutters. The fence came down without a sound. They slipped through. The loading dock door was locked, but Priest had it open in 30 seconds. Inside, the warehouse smelled like concrete and motor oil and something chemical that made Caleb's eyes water. Rows of shelving units stretched into darkness. Boxes stacked 10 feet high. A desk near the far wall with a computer still running, screen glowing blue in the black. Landry went straight for it. The rest of them spread out, checking corners, watching doors. Caleb moved along the shelving units, reading labels. Medical supplies, prescription bottles. Enough controlled substances to supply half the county. Then he found something else. A corkboard hanging on the wall near the desk. Photos pinned in neat rows. Families, addresses, notes written in careful handwriting. Anna Whitaker, compliant, isolated, high yield. Marcus Chen, resistant, flagged for removal. Sarah Vega, new referral, single mother, 3 children. Caleb's hands curled into fists. These weren't just records, they were targets. People marked for exploitation like livestock. "Rook!" Marcus called from across the warehouse. "You need to see this!" Caleb walked over. Marcus was holding a file folder. Inside were photocopies of social services reports, all of them signed by the same caseworker, Lisa Chen, the woman who'd filed a complaint about Ronald and been transferred out of the district. "She was trying to blow the whistle," Marcus said, "and they buried her." Landry looked up from the computer. "I've got everything. Financial records, names, communications. Enough to put 20 people in federal prison." "Download it," Caleb said. "All of it." Landry's fingers flew across the keyboard. Then the lights came on. Blinding white fluorescence flooded the warehouse, turning shadows into glaring exposure. Caleb's hand went to the tire iron on his belt. Vincent Cray stood near the loading dock with 4 other men. Big men. The kind who solved problems with violence first and questions never. Vincent smiled. "You broke into the wrong place, Rook." Caleb didn't move. "We're taking evidence of a criminal operation to the police. You can let us walk out, or you can explain to a judge why you tried to stop us." Vincent's smile widened. "I don't think you're walking anywhere." The 4 men spread out, blocking exits. Marcus stepped beside Caleb, tire iron in hand. Priest moved left. Raylan right. The other riders formed a line, silent and ready. Vincent pulled a knife. Last chance to leave empty-handed. Caleb looked at the computer where Landry was still downloading files. 20 seconds. Maybe 30. He looked at the corkboard with photos of families who didn't know they were being hunted. He looked at Marcus, who nodded once. Then Caleb charged. The warehouse erupted. Caleb's tire iron caught Vincent's knife hand, sent the blade skittering across concrete. Vincent's fist connected with Caleb's jaw, stars exploding behind his eyes. He tasted blood and swung again, catching Vincent in the ribs. Around them, the others fought. Priest moved like something carved from violence, methodical and brutal. Raylan was faster,
slipping past punches and returning them twice as hard. Marcus fought with the efficiency of someone who'd done this too many times to waste energy on theatrics. But they were outnumbered. One of Vincent's men grabbed Landry, pulled him away from the computer. The download bar froze at 78%. Caleb saw it happen. He broke away from Vincent and crossed the warehouse in 4 strides. His shoulder drove into the man holding Landry, sent them both crashing into the shelving unit. Boxes rained down, pills scattered across the floor like deadly confetti. Landry scrambled back to the computer. 10 more seconds. Vincent came at Caleb again, knife back in his hand. The blade caught Caleb's arm, shallow but burning. Blood soaked through his sleeve. Caleb didn't stop. He grabbed Vincent's wrist, twisted, drove his knee into the man's stomach. Vincent went down gasping. "Done!" Landry shouted. He yanked the USB drive from the computer and ran. "Move!" Marcus yelled. They ran for the loading dock. Behind them, Vincent and his men scrambled to follow. Outside, the motorcycles roared to life. Caleb swung onto the Harley, ribs screaming, arm bleeding, vision blurred. But his hands found the throttle and the engine answered. They rode. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Red and blue lights strobed through the industrial park as police cruisers converged on the warehouse. Marcus had made the call before they'd even gone inside. Anonymous tip. Criminal operation in progress. Police response time exactly calculated. By the time Vincent and his men reached the loading dock, they were surrounded. And by the time Caleb and the others reached the county line, they were ghosts disappearing into December night. They didn't stop until they reached an all-night diner 40 miles outside town. The kind of place that served coffee strong enough to strip paint and didn't ask why 7 people walked in at 2 in the morning looking like they'd survived a war. Caleb sat in a booth with Marcus across from him. Priest, Raylan, and Landry crowded into the next booth over. The other 3 riders took a table by the window, watching the parking lot. A waitress with tired eyes and a kind smile brought coffee without being asked. Landry set the USB drive on the table. "Everything," he said. "Names, records, communications, enough to dismantle the whole operation." Marcus picked up the drive and turned it over in his scarred hands. "We give this to Deputy Malloy?" "We give it to everyone," Caleb said. "Malloy, the DA, the FBI. We make so many copies they can't bury it." "And if they ask how we got it?" Priest asked. "We don't tell them," Raylan said. "Anonymous delivery. Let them figure it out." Caleb looked at the coffee in front of him, black and steaming. His arm throbbed where Vincent's knife had caught him. His ribs ached. His knuckles were split again. But Maisie was safe. Anna was getting help. And Daniel's death wouldn't be just another accident buried under paperwork and convenient explanations. "We did it," Caleb said quietly. Marcus smiled. "Yeah, brother, we did." 3 weeks later, the story broke across every news channel in the state. Federal indictments, 23 arrests. A criminal network that had been exploiting vulnerable families for years finally dragged into the light. Ronald Whitaker was named as a key player. So was Vincent Cray. So were a dozen others whose names Caleb had seen on that corkboard. Lisa Chen was interviewed on the evening news, vindicated after being silenced for trying to do the right thing. And buried in the investigative reports, mentioned only briefly, was a note about Daniel Mercer, a teacher who'd filed concerns about a family in distress 6 years ago, concerns that had been ignored. A death that had been ruled accidental, but was now being reviewed as a possible homicide connected to the larger criminal conspiracy. Caleb sat in his garage watching the news on a small TV he'd dragged in from the house. The paper crane sat on the workbench beside Daniel's photograph. His phone rang. Anna's number. "Hello?" "Mr. Caleb, it's Maisie." Her voice sounded stronger than it had 3 weeks ago. Still small, still carrying weight no child should carry, but stronger. "Hey, kid. You doing okay?" "Yeah, Mom says we're moving in with Aunt Rebecca next month. I get my own room. It has yellow curtains." Caleb smiled. "That sounds perfect." "Mr. Caleb?" "Yeah?" "They said on the news that Mr. Daniel might not have died in an accident, that someone might have hurt him because he was helping people." Caleb's throat tightened. "That's what they're looking into." Maisie was quiet for a moment. "Does that mean he died because of us? Because he helped my mom?" "No," Caleb said firmly. "It means he died because bad people decided hurting others was easier than being human.
That's not on you. That's not on your mom. That's on them.
Okay, she whispered. And Maisie? Yeah?
Your Mr. Daniel would be proud of you. You're the bravest person I know. He heard her smile through the phone. Mom wants to talk to you. There was shuffling, then Anna's voice. Caleb? Yeah. Rebecca and I were talking about the guardianship paperwork. We want to move forward with it, if you're still willing. Caleb looked at Daniel's photograph, at the yellow flower, at his son's smile. I'm willing, he said. Thank you, Anna said, for everything. After they hung up, Caleb sat in the silence of the garage for a long time. The space heater rattled. Outside, wind moved through the bare trees. Snow had started to fall, light and quiet, covering the world in something clean. Marcus showed up an hour later with a six-pack and no explanation. They sat on overturned crates drinking beer that tasted like metal and memories. You hear the news? Marcus asked. Yeah. Your son's name is going to be cleared. Official investigation into his death. The whole thing. Caleb nodded. Doesn't bring him back. No, Marcus agreed. But it means he didn't die for nothing. They drank in silence. Then Marcus said, You know what Daniel told me in that letter? Caleb looked over. He said you taught him that broken things can still be useful, that a man doesn't have to be perfect to be worth something. Marcus set down his beer. And he said if you ever figured that out about yourself, you'd be the most dangerous kind of man, the kind who stops running and starts building. Caleb felt the words settle somewhere deep. I don't know how to build, he said. Yeah, you do, Marcus said. You just spent 3 weeks doing it. Over the next month, Caleb fell into a rhythm that felt like life instead of survival. He worked in the garage fixing cars for people who couldn't afford mechanics. He had dinner with Anna, Rebecca, and Maisie once a week, learning how to be someone a child could count on without being blood. He attended probation meetings and community service shifts, cleaning up parks and painting over graffiti with other men, trying to prove they were more than their worst mistakes. And every Friday at 5:30, he visited Daniel's grave. But he wasn't alone anymore. Sometimes Marcus came. Sometimes Maisie came with yellow flowers she'd bought from Mrs. Bell. Sometimes it was just Caleb and the wind and the quiet understanding that grief didn't have to be carried in isolation. On a cold February afternoon, Caleb knelt beside the headstone with a white rose in his hand and a peace that felt almost like forgiveness. I met a kid who knew you, he said to the stone. She said you told her I could fix broken engines. Turns out you were talking about more than carburetors. The wind moved through the cemetery, carrying the smell of snow and distant smoke. I'm sorry I didn't answer the phone that day, Caleb continued. I'm sorry I spent 6 years being angry instead of remembering you were right about most things. He placed the rose at the base of the stone. But I'm trying now, the way you always said I should. Behind him, boots crunched on gravel. Caleb turned. Maisie stood there with Rebecca a few steps back, giving them space. Maisie was wearing a red winter coat that fit properly now, and her face had color again. She looked like a child instead of a survivor. Hi, Mr. Caleb, she said. Hey, kid. She walked over and knelt beside him, placing a yellow carnation next to the white rose. I brought one for Mr. Daniel, she said, and one for you. She held out a second yellow flower. Caleb took it carefully. What's this for? Because you came when I needed you, Maisie said, and because Mr. Daniel said people who help should be thanked, not just remembered. Caleb looked at the flower in his hand. Cheap, bright, alive. Thank you, he said. They knelt there for a while. Two people who'd found each other at a grave and learned that some families aren't built from blood, but from the willingness to stand when standing costs everything. Finally, Maisie stood. Mom and Aunt Rebecca are making dinner. You should come. Caleb looked at Rebecca, who nodded. We'd like that, Rebecca said. Caleb stood slowly, his knees complaining, his ribs still tender from wounds that were healing but not healed. He looked at Daniel's name carved in stone. Beloved son, teacher, friend. And for the first time in 6 years, Caleb believed all 3 words were true. Let's go, he said. They walked down the gravel path together, past headstones and bare trees, and the promise that winter eventually ends. Behind them, 2 flowers sat side by side at Daniel's grave, white and yellow. Father and son. Memory and hope. The Harley sat in the parking lot, black and patient. Caleb swung his leg over and felt the engine rumble to life beneath him. Maisie climbed onto Rebecca's car, and together they drove away from the cemetery into a February afternoon that tasted like snow and second chances. At Anna's house, the blue porch light was still on, but now it didn't mark a place to escape from. It marked a place to return to. Inside, the table was set. Yellow flowers from Mrs. Bell sat in a jelly jar in the center. Anna moved through the kitchen with careful purpose, still healing but no longer disappearing. Rebecca poured coffee. Maisie showed Caleb a drawing she'd made at school of a man on a motorcycle and a girl with a paper crane. "That's us," she said. "Yeah," Caleb said. "It is." They ate dinner like families do, passing plates, telling stories, laughing at small things that weren't particularly funny but felt good anyway. And when Caleb left 3 hours later, full of food and something warmer than gratitude, Maisie walked him to the door. "Mr. Caleb?" "Yeah?" "Do you think Mr. Daniel knows we're okay now?" Caleb crouched down so he was eye level with her. "I think if there's anything after this, he knows. And I think he's glad you found me." "Me too," Maisie said. She hugged him quickly, then ran back inside where her mother was calling her to help with dishes. Caleb walked to the Harley and stood there for a moment, looking at the house with the blue porch light and the yellow flowers and the family he'd somehow become part of without meaning to. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Iron Sanctuary ride this weekend. You in?" Caleb looked at the message, looked at the house, looked at the road stretching out into darkness. He typed back, "Yeah, I'm in." He started the engine and rode home through streets that didn't feel quite as cold anymore. The garage was waiting, warm with the space heater and the smell of oil and years of solitary grief finally breaking apart into something survivable. Inside, the photograph of Daniel still sat on the workbench, the paper crane beside it, and next to both of them, a new addition, Maisie's drawing, the man on the motorcycle and the girl with the paper crane. Caleb picked it up and studied the careful lines, the bright colors, the way she'd drawn them facing each other instead of looking away. He pinned it to the wall above the workbench where he'd see it every morning. Then he sat down with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and Daniel's letter that he'd read 100 times but still carried in his jacket pocket like a map. "Broken doesn't mean worthless," Daniel had written. He forgot that about himself somewhere along the road. Maybe helping someone else will remind him. Caleb folded the letter carefully and set it beside the photograph. "I remembered, Danny," he said quietly. "Took me long enough, but I remembered." Outside, snow continued to fall. The kind that covered mistakes and tire tracks, and the jagged edges of a world that wasn't fair but sometimes, if you fought hard enough, could be survived. Caleb Rook Mercer had spent 6 years visiting a grave and carrying guilt like armor. Now he had a child who called him when she was scared, a woman who trusted him to be part of her daughter's life, a brotherhood that stood beside him when the law said walk away, and a garage that smelled like second chances and engines waiting to be fixed. He couldn't bring Daniel back, but he could honor what his son had built. One yellow flower, one frightened child, one broken family at a time. And in the end, that was enough. Not perfect, not clean, but enough. The space heater rattled against the cold. The coffee went from cold to forgotten. And Caleb sat in the quiet garage surrounded by tools and memories and the certain knowledge that broken things could still be useful, just like his son had always said.